Relax and listen to the voice. The Frog Prince, or Iron Henry. In olden times, when wishing still helped one, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun itself, which had seen so much, was astonished whenever it shone in her face. Close by the king's castle lay a great dark forest, and under an old lime tree in the forest was a well. And when the day was very warm, the king's child went out into the forest and sat down by the side of the cool fountain. And when she was bored, she took a golden ball and threw it up on high and caught it, and this ball was her favorite plaything. Now, it so happened that on one occasion the princess's golden ball did not fall into the little hand which she was holding it up for, but onto the ground beyond, and rolled straight into the water. The king's daughter followed it with her eyes, but it vanished, and the well was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen. At this she began to cry, and she cried louder and louder, and could not be comforted. And as she thus lamented, someone said to her, "What ails you, king's daughter? You weep so that even a stone would show pity." She looked round to the side from whence the voice came, and saw a frog stretching forth its big ugly head from the water. "Ah, old water splasher, is it you?" she said. "I am weeping for my golden ball, which has fallen into the well." "Be quiet and do not weep," answered the frog. "I can help you, but what will you give me if I bring your plaything up again?" "Whatever you will have, dear frog," said she. "My clothes, my pearls, my jewels, and even the golden crown which I am wearing." The frog answered, "I do not care for your clothes, your pearls, your jewels, nor for your golden crown. But if you will love me, and let me be your companion and playfellow, and let me sit by you at your little table, and eat off of your little golden plate, and drink out of your little cup, and sleep in your little bed, if you will promise me all of this, I will go down below, and I will bring up your golden ball." "Oh yes," she said, "I promise you all you wish, if you will but bring up my ball again." But she thought, how the silly frog does talk. All he does is sit in water with the other frogs and croak. He can be no companion to any human being. But the frog, when he had received this promise, he put his head into the water and sank down, and in a short while he came swimming up again with the ball in his mouth, and he threw it onto the grass. The king's daughter was delighted to see her pretty plaything once more, and she picked it up and ran away with it. "Wait, wait, wait," said the frog. "Take me with you. I can't run like you can." But what did it avail to him to scream his croak, croak after her, as loudly as he could? She did not listen to it, but ran back home and soon forgot the poor frog, who was forced to go back into his well again. The next day, when she had seated herself at the table with the king and all the courtiers, and was eating from her little golden plate, something came creeping, splish, splash, up the marble staircase, and when it had gotten to the top, it knocked at the door and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me." She ran to see who it was outside, but when she opened the door, there sat the frog in front of it. She then slammed the door to, in great haste, sat down for dinner again, and she was quite frightened. The king saw plainly that her heart was beating violently, and said, "My child, what are you so afraid of? Is there perchance a giant outside who wants to carry you away?" No," replied she. "There's no giant, but a disgusting little frog." "What does a frog want with you?" "Ah, dear father, yesterday as I was in the forest sitting by the well playing, my golden ball fell into the water, and because I cried so, the frog brought it out again for me, and because he so insisted, I promised him that he should be my companion, but I never thought he would be able to come out of this water, and now he's outside there, and wants to come into me." In the meantime, it knocked a second time, and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me. You do not know what you said to me yesterday by the cool waters of the well. Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me. Then said the king, That which you have promised must you perform. Go and let him in. She went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in and followed her, step by step, to her chair. There he sat and cried, Lift me up beside you. She delayed until at last the king commanded her to do it. Once the frog was on the chair, he wanted to be on the table, and when he was on the table, he said, Now push your little golden plate nearer to me, that we may eat together. She did this, but it was easy to see that she did not do it willingly. The frog enjoyed what he ate, but almost every mouthful that she took choked her. At length he said, I have eaten and I am satisfied. Now I am tired. Carry me into your little room and make your little silken bed ready, and we will both lie down and go to sleep. The king's daughter began to cry, for she was afraid of the cold frog which she did not like to touch, and which was now to sleep in her pretty, clean little bed. But the king grew angry and said, He who helped you when you were in trouble ought not afterwards to be despised by you. So she took hold of the frog with 2 fingers, carried him upstairs, and put him in a corner. But when she was in bed, he crept up to her and said, I am tired. I want to sleep as well as you. Lift me up, or I will tell your father. At this she was terribly angry. She took him up and threw him with all of her might against the wall. Now will you be quiet, odious frog? Said she. But when he fell down, he was no frog, but a king's son with kind and beautiful eyes. He, by her father's will, was now her dear companion and husband. Then he told her how he had been bewitched by a wicked witch, and how no one could have delivered him from the well but herself, and that tomorrow they would go together into his kingdom. Then they went to sleep, and the next morning when the sun awoke them, a carriage came driving up with 8 white horses, which had white ostrich feathers on their heads, and were harnessed with golden chains, and behind stood the young king's servant, Faithful Henry. Faithful Henry had been so unhappy when his master was changed into a frog that he had caused 3 iron bands to be laid around his heart, lest it should burst with grief and sadness. The carriage was to conduct the young king into his kingdom. Faithful Henry helped them both in, and placed himself behind again, and was full of joy because of this deliverance. And when they had driven a part of the way, the king's son heard a cracking behind him as if something had broken. So he turned around and cried, Henry, the carriage is breaking. No, master, it's not the carriage. It is a band for my heart, which was put there in my great pain when you were a frog and imprisoned in the well. Again and once again, while they were on their way, something cracked, and each time the king's son thought that the carriage was breaking, but it was only the bands which were springing from the heart of Faithful Henry, because his master was set free and was once again happy. Our Lady's Child. Hard by a great forest dwelt a woodcutter with his wife, who had an only child, a little girl 3 years old. They were so poor, however, that they no longer had daily bread, and did not know how to get food for her. One morning the woodcutter went out sorrowfully to get his work in the forest, and while he was cutting wood, suddenly there stood before him a tall and beautiful woman with a crown of shining stars on her head, who said to him, I am the Virgin Mary, mother of the child Jesus. You are poor and needy. Bring your child to me. I will take her with me and be her mother and care for her. The woodcutter obeyed. He brought his child and gave her to the Virgin Mary, who took her up to heaven with her. There the child fared well, ate sugar cakes and drank sweet milk, and her clothes were of gold, and the little angels played with her. And when she was 14 years of age, the Virgin Mary called her one day and said, Dear child, I am about to make a long journey, so take into your keeping the eyes of the 13 doors of heaven. 12 of these you may open, and behold the glory which is within them. but the 13th, to which this little key belongs, is forbidden to you. Take care not to open it, or you will be unhappy." The girl promised to be obedient, and when the Virgin Mary was gone, she began to examine the dwellings of the kingdoms of heaven. Each day she opened one of them, till she had made the round of all 12. In each of them sat one of the apostles in the midst of a great light, and she rejoiced in all the magnificence and splendor, and the little angels who always accompanied her rejoiced with her. Then the forbidden door alone remained, and she felt a great desire to know what could be hidden behind it, and said to the angels, "I will not open it entirely, and I will not go inside, but I will unlock it so that we can see just a little through the opening." "Oh no," said the little angels, "that would be a sin. The Virgin Mary has forbidden it, and it might easily cause your unhappiness." Then she was silent, but the desire in her heart was not stilled, but gnawed there and tormented her, and let her have no rest. And once when the angels had all gone out, she thought, "Now I'm quite alone, and I could peep in. If I do, no one will ever know." She sought out the key, and when she had gotten it into her hand, she put it into the lock, and when she had put it in, she turned it round as well. Then the door sprang open, and she saw there the Trinity sitting in fire and splendor. She stayed there a while and looked at everything in amazement. Then she touched the light a little with her finger, and her finger became quite golden. Immediately a great fear fell upon her. She shut the door violently and ran away. Her terror, too, would not quit her, let her do what she might, and her heart beat continually and would not be still. The gold, too, stayed on her finger and would not go away, let her rub it and wash it never so much. It was not long before the Virgin Mary came back from her journey. She called the girl before her and asked to have the keys of heaven back. When the maiden gave her the bunch, the Virgin looked into her eyes and said, "Hast thou not opened the 13th door also?" "No," she replied. Then she laid her hand on the girl's heart and felt how it beat and beat, and saw right well that she had disobeyed her order and had opened the door. Then she said once again, "Art thou certain that thou hast not done it?" "Yes," said the girl for the second time. Then she perceived the finger, which had become golden from touching the fire of heaven, and saw well that the child had sinned, and said for the third time, "Hast thou not done it?" "No," said the girl for the third time. Then said the Virgin Mary, "Thou hast not obeyed me, and besides that, thou hast lied. You are no longer worthy to be in heaven." Then the girl fell into a deep sleep, and when she awoke, she lay on the earth below, and in the midst of a wilderness. She wanted to cry out, but she couldn't bring forth any sound. She sprang up and wanted to run away, but whithersoever she turned herself, she was continually held back by thick hedges of thorns through which she could not break. In the desert in which she was imprisoned, there stood an old hollow tree, and this had to be her dwelling place. Into this she crept when night came, and here she slept. Here, too, she found a shelter from night, storm, and rain, but it was a miserable life, and bitterly did she weep when she remembered how happy she had been in heaven, and how the angels had played with her. Roots and wild berries were her only food, and for these she sought as far as she could go. In the autumn she picked up the fallen nuts and leaves and carried them into a hole. The nuts were her food in the winter, and when snow and ice came, she crept amongst the leaves like a poor little animal that she might not freeze. Before long her clothes were all torn, and one bit of them after another fell off of her. As soon, however, as the sun shone warm again, she went out and sat in front of the tree, and her long hair covered her on all sides like a mantle. Thus she sat year after year, and felt the pain and the misery of the world. One day, when the trees were once more clothed in fresh green, the king of the country was hunting in the forest, and followed a roe, and as it had fled into the thicket which shut in this part of the forest, he got off his horse, tore the bushes asunder, and cut himself a path with his sword. When he had at last forced his way through, he saw a wonderfully beautiful maiden sitting under the tree, and she sat there and was entirely covered with her golden hair down to her very feet. He stood still and looked at her full of surprise. Then he spoke to her and said, "Who are you? Why are you sitting here in the wilderness?" But she gave him no answer, for she could not open her mouth. The king continued, "Will you go with me to my castle?" And she just nodded her head a little. The king took her in his arms and carried her into his horse and rode home with her. And when he reached the royal castle, he caused her to be dressed in beautiful garments and gave her all things in abundance. Although she could not speak, she was still so beautiful and charming that he began to love her with all of his heart, and it was not long before he married her. After a year or so had passed, the queen brought a son into the world. Thereupon the Virgin Mary appeared to her in the night, and she lay in her bed alone, and she said, "If you will tell the truth and confess that you did unlock the forbidden door, I will open your mouth and give you back your speech. But if you persevere in your sin and deny obstinately, I will take your newborn child away with me." The queen was permitted to answer, but she remained hard and said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." And the Virgin Mary took the newborn child from her arms and vanished with it. Next morning, when the child was not to be found, it was whispered among the people that the queen was a man-eater and had put her own child to death. She heard all this and could say nothing to the contrary, but the king would not believe it, for he loved her so much. When a year had gone by, the queen again bore another son, and in the night the Virgin Mary again came to her and said, "If you will confess that you opened the forbidden door, I will give you your child back and untie your tongue. But if you continue to sin and deny it, I will take away with me this new child also." The queen again said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." And the Virgin took the child out of her arms and away with her to heaven. The next morning this child also had disappeared. The people declared quite loudly that the queen had devoured it, and the king's counselors demanded that she be brought to justice. The king, however, loved her so dearly that he would not believe it, and commanded the counselors under pain of death that they not to say any more about it. The following year, the queen gave birth to a beautiful little daughter, and for the third time, the Virgin Mary appeared to her in the night and said, "Follow me." She took the queen by the hand and led her to heaven, and showed her there her two eldest children, who smiled at her and were playing with the ball of the world. When the queen rejoiced thereat, the Virgin Mary said, "Is your heart not yet softened? If you will own that you opened the forbidden door, I will give you back your two little sons." But for the third time the queen answered, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." Then the Virgin let her sink down to earth once more, and took from her likewise her third child. The next morning, when the loss was reported abroad, all of the people cried loudly, "The queen is a man-eater! She must be judged!" But the king was no longer able to restrain his counselors. Thereupon a trial was held, and as she could not answer or defend herself, she was condemned to be burned at the stake. The wood was gotten together, and when she was fast bound to the stake, and the fire began to burn around her, the hard ice of pride finally melted. Her heart was moved by repentance, and she thought, "If I could but confess before my death that I opened the door." Then her voice came back to her, and she cried out loudly, "Yes, Mary, I did it." And straightway rain fell from the sky and extinguished the flames of fire, and a light broke forth above her, and the Virgin Mary descended with her two little sons by her side, and the newborn daughter cradled in her arms. She spoke kindly to her, and said, "He who repents his sin and acknowledges it is forgiven." Then she gave her the three children, untied her tongue, and granted her happiness for her whole life. The story of a youth who went forth to learn what fear was. A certain father had two sons, the elder of whom was smart and sensible, and could do everything, But the younger was stupid and could neither learn nor understand anything, and when people saw him, they said, "Well, there's a fellow who will give his father some trouble." When anything had to be done, it was always the elder who was forced to do it. But if his father bade him fetch anything when it was late, or in the night time, and the way led through the churchyard or any other dismal place, he answered, "Oh, no, father, I'll not go there. It makes me shudder." For he was afraid. Or when stories were told by the fire at night, which made the flesh creep, the listeners sometimes said, "Oh, it makes us shudder." The younger sat in a corner and listened with the rest of them, and could not imagine what they could mean. They are always saying, "It makes me shudder, it makes me shudder." "It does not make me shudder," thought he. "That too must be an art, in which I understand nothing." Now it came to pass that his father said to him one day, "Hearken to me, you fellow in the corner there. You are growing tall and strong, and you too must learn something by which you can earn your bread. Look how your brother works, but you do not even earn your salt." "Well, father," he replied, "I am quite willing to learn something indeed, if it could be managed. I should like to learn how to shudder. I don't understand that all yet." The elder brother smiled when he heard that, and thought to himself, "Good God, what a blockhead that brother of mine is. He will never be good for anything as long as he lives. He who wants to be a sickle must bend himself betimes." The father sighed and answered him, "You shall soon learn what it is to shudder, but you will not earn your bread by that." Soon after, the sexton came to the house for a visit, and the father bewailed his trouble, and told him how his younger son was so backward in every respect that he knew nothing and learnt nothing. "Just think," said he, "when I asked him how he was going to earn his bread, he actually wanted to learn how to shudder." "If that be all," replied the sexton, "he can learn with me. Send him to me, and I will soon polish him." The father was glad to do it, for he thought, "It will train the boy a little." The sexton therefore took him into his house, and had to ring the church bell. After a day or two, the sexton awoke him at midnight, and bade him to rise and go up into the church tower and ring the bell. "You shall soon learn what shuddering is," thought he, and secretly went there before him, and when the boy was at the top of the tower, and turned round, and was just going to take hold of the bell rope, he saw a white figure standing at the stairs opposite of the sounding hole. "Who is there?" cried he, but the figure made no reply, and did not move or stir. "Give an answer," cried the boy, "or take yourself off. You have no business here at night." The sexton, however, remained standing motionless, that the boy might think he was a ghost. The boy cried a second time, "What do you want here? Speak if you are an honest fellow, or I will throw you down the steps." The sexton thought, "He can't mean to be as bad as his words." He uttered no sound, and stood as if he were made of stone. Then the boy called to him for a third time, and as that was also to no purpose, he ran against him and pushed the ghost down the stairs, so that it fell down 10 steps and remained lying there in the corner. Thereupon he rang the bell, went home, and without saying a word, went to bed and fell asleep. The sexton's wife waited a long time for her husband, but he did not come back home. At length she became uneasy, and wakened the boy, and asked him, "Do you not know where my husband is? He climbed up the tower before you did." "No, I don't know," replied the boy, "but someone was standing by the sounding hole on the other side of the steps, and as he would neither give an answer nor go away, I took him for a scoundrel and threw him down the stairs. Just go there and you will see if it was he. I should be sorry if it were." The woman ran away and found her husband, who was lying moaning in the corner and had a broken leg. She carried him down, and with loud screams she hastened to the boy's father. "Your boy," she cried, "has been the cause of a great misfortune. He's thrown my husband down the steps so that he broke his leg. Take the good-for-nothing fellow out of our house." The father was terrified, and ran thither and scolded the boy. "What wicked tricks are these?" said he. "The devil must have put it into your head." "Father," he replied, "do listen to me. I'm quite innocent. He was standing there by night like one intent on doing evil. I did not know who it was, and I entreated him 3 times either to speak or to go away." "Ah," said the father, "I have nothing but unhappiness with you. Go out of my sight. I will see you no more." "Yes, father, right willingly. Wait only until it is day. Then I will go forth and learn how to shudder, and then I shall, at any rate, understand one art which shall support me." "Learn what you will," spoke the father. "It is all the same to me. Here are 50 tailors for you. Take these and go into the wide world, and tell no one from whence you came, and who is your father, for I have reason to be ashamed of you." "Yes, father, it shall be as you will. If you desire nothing more than that, I can easily keep it in mind." When the day dawned, therefore, the boy put his 50 tailors into his pocket, and went forth on the great highway, and continually said to himself, "If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder." Then a man approached who heard this conversation which the youth was holding with himself. And when they had walked a little further to where they could see the gallows, the man said to him, "Look, there is the tree where 7 men have married the rope-maker's daughter, and are now learning how to fly. Sit down beneath it, and wait until night comes, and you will soon learn how to shudder." "If that is all that is wanted," answered the youth, "it is easily done. But if I learn how to shudder as fast as that, you shall have my 50 tailors. Just come back to me early in the morning." Then the youth went to the gallows, sat down beneath it, and waited until the evening came. And as it was cold, he lighted himself a fire, but at midnight the wind blew so sharply that in spite of his fire he could not get warm. And as the wind knocked the hanged men against each other, and they moved backwards and forwards, he thought to himself, "If you shiver below by the fire, how those up above must freeze and suffer." And as he felt pity for them, he raised the ladder and climbed up, unbound one of them after the other, and brought down all 7. Then he stoked the fire, blew it, and set them all around it to warm themselves. But they sat there and did not stir, and the fire caught their clothes. So he said, "Take care, or I will hang you up again." The dead men, however, did not hear, but were quite silent, and let their rags go on burning. At this the boy grew angry and said, "If you will not take care, I cannot help you. I will not be burnt with you." And he hung them up again, each in his turn. Then he sat down by the fire and fell asleep. And the next morning the man came to him and wanted to have the 50 tailors, and said, "Well, do you know how to shudder?" "No," answered the boy. "How should I know? Those fellows up there did not open their mouths, and they were so stupid that they let the few old rags which they had on their bodies get burnt." Then the man saw that he could not get the 50 tailors that day, and he went away, saying, "Such a youth has never come my way before." The youth likewise went his way, and once more began to mutter to himself, "Ah, if I could but shudder, if I could but shudder." A wagoner who was striding behind him heard this and asked, "Who are you?" "I don't know," answered the youth. Then the wagoner asked, "From whence do you come?" "I know not," said the youth. "Who was your father?" "That I may not tell you." "What is it that you are always muttering between your teeth?" "Ah," replied the youth, "I do so wish I could shudder, but no one can teach me how." "Enough of your foolish chatter," said the wagoner. "Come, go with me. I will see about a place for you." The youth went with the wagoner, and in the evening they arrived at an inn where they wished to pass the night. Then, at the entrance of the parlor, the youth again said quite loudly, "If I could only but shudder." The host who heard this laughed and said, "If that is your desire, there ought to be a good opportunity for you here." "Ah, be silent," said the hostess. "So many prying persons have already lost their lives. It would be a pity and a shame if such beautiful eyes as these should never see the daylight again." But the youth said, "However difficult it may be, I will learn it. For this purpose, indeed, I have journeyed forth." He let the host have no rest until the latter told him that not far from thence stood a haunted castle where anyone could very easily learn that shuddering was, if he would but watch in it for 3 nights. The king had promised that he who would venture should have his daughter to wife, and she was the most beautiful maiden the sun had ever shone on. Likewise, in the castle lay great treasures, which were guarded by evil spirits, and these treasures would then be freed, and would make a poor man rich enough. Already many men had gone into the castle, but as yet none had come out again. Then the youth went next morning to the king and said, "If it be allowed, I will willingly watch 3 nights in the haunted castle." The king looked at him, and as the youth pleased him, he said, "You may ask for 3 things to take into the castle with you, but they must be things without life." Then he answered, "Then I ask for a fire, a turning lathe, and a cutting board with a knife." The king had these things carried into the castle for him during the day. When night was drawing near, the youth went up and made himself a bright fire in one of the rooms, placed the cutting board and knife beside it, and seated himself by the turning lathe. "Ah, if I could but shudder," said he, "but I shall not learn it here either." Towards midnight he was about to poke his fire, and as he was blowing it, something cried suddenly from the corner, "Oh, ew, how cold we are!" "You fools," cried he, "what are you crying about? If you are cold, come take a seat by the fire and warm yourselves." And when he had said that, 2 great black cats came up with one tremendous leap, and sat down on each side of him, and looked savagely at him with their fiery eyes. After a short time, when they had warmed themselves, they said, "Comrade, shall we have a game of cards?" "Why not?" he replied, "but just show me your paws." Then they stretched out their claws. "Oh," said he, "what long nails you have! Wait, I must first cut them for you." Thereupon he seized them by their throats, put them on the cutting board, and screwed their feet fast. "I've looked at your fingers," said he, "and my fancy for card playing is gone." And he struck them dead and threw them out into the water. But when he had made away with these 2, and was about to sit back down again by his fire, out from every hole and corner came black cats and black dogs with red-hot chains, and more of them came until he could no longer move, and they yelled horribly, and got on his fire, pulled it to pieces, and tried to put it out. He watched them for a while, quietly, but at last, when they were going too far, he seized his cutting knife and cried, "Away with you, vermin!" and he began to cut them down. Some of them ran away, the others he killed and threw out into the fish pond. When he came back, he fanned the embers of his fire again and warmed himself. And as he thus sat, his eyes would keep open no longer, and he felt a desire to sleep. Then he looked round and saw a great bed in the corner. "That is the very thing for me," said he, and he got into it. When he was just going to shut his eyes, however, the bed began to move of its own accord, and went over the whole of the castle. "That's right," said he, "but go faster." Then the bed rolled on as if 6 horses were harnessed to it, up and down, over thresholds and stairs, but suddenly, hop, hop, it turned over upside down and lay on him like a mountain. But he threw quilts and pillows up in the air, got out and said, "Now, anyone who likes may drive and lay down by his fire," and he slept it until it was day. In the morning the king came, and when he saw him lying there on the ground, he thought the evil spirits had killed him and that he was dead. Then said he, "After all, it is a pity, for such a handsome young man." The youth heard that, got up, and said, "It has not come to that yet." Then the king was astonished, but very glad, and asked how he had fared. "Very well indeed," answered the boy. "One night has passed, and 2 others will pass likewise." Then he went over to the innkeeper, who opened his eyes very wide, and said, "I never expected to see you alive again. Have you learnt how to shudder yet?" "No," said the boy. "It is all in vain. If someone would but tell me." The second night he went again up into the old castle, sat down by the fire, and once more began his old song, "Ah, if I could but shudder." When midnight came, an uproar and noise of tumbling about was heard. At first it was low, but it grew louder and louder. Then it was quiet for a while, and at length, with a loud scream, half of a man came down the chimney and fell before him. "Hello!" cried he. "Another half belongs to this. This is not enough." Then, suddenly, the uproar began again. There was a roaring and howling, and the other half fell down likewise. "Wait," said the man. "I will just stoke up the fire a little bit for you." When he had done that and looked around again, the 2 pieces were joined together, and a hideous man was sitting in his place. "That is no part of our bargain," said the youth. "The bench is mine." The man wanted to push him away. The youth, however, would not allow that, but thrust him off with all of his strength, and seated himself again in his own place. Then still more men fell down, one after the other, They brought 9 dead men's legs and 2 skulls, and set them up, and played at 9-pins with them. The youth also wanted to play, and said, "Listen, you, can I join you?" "Yes, if you have any money." "Well, money enough," replied the boy, "but your balls are not quite round." Then he took the skulls, and put them in the lathe, and turned them till they were round. "There, now they will roll better," said the boy. "Hurrah! Now we will have fun." He played with them and lost some of his money, but it was struck 12. Everything vanished from his sight. He lay down and quietly fell asleep. Next morning the king came up to inquire after him. "How has it fared with you this time?" asked the king. "I've been playing at 9-pins," he answered, "and I've lost a couple of farthings." "Have you not shuddered then?" said the king. "What?" said the boy. "I've had a wonderful time. If only I did but know what it was like to shudder." The third night he sat down again on his bench, and said quite sadly, "Oh, if I could but shudder." When it grew late, 6 tall men came in and brought a coffin. Then said he, "Ha ha ha, that is certainly my little cousin, who died only a few days ago." And he beckoned with his finger, and cried, "Come, little cousin, come." They placed the coffin on the ground, but he went to it and took the lid off, and a dead man lay therein. He felt his face, but it was cold as ice. "Wait, I will warm you a little." And he went to the fire, and warmed his hand, and laid it on the dead man's face, but the dead man remained cold. Then he took him out, and sat down by the fire, and laid him on his breast, and rubbed his arms that blood might circulate again. As this also did no good, he thought to himself, "When 2 people lie in bed together, they warm each other," and he carried him to the bed, covered him over, and lay down by him. After a short time, the dead man became warm too, and began to move. Then said the youth, "See, little cousin, have I not warmed you?" The dead man, however, got up and cried, "Now I will strangle you." "What?" said the boy. "Is that the way you thank me?" "You shall at once go into your coffin again." And he took him up, threw him into the coffin, and shut the lid. Then came the 6 men and carried him away again. "I cannot manage to shudder," said the boy. "I shall never learn it here as long as I live." Then a man entered who was taller than all the others, and he looked terrible. He was old, however, and had a long white beard. "You wretch," cried he, "you shall soon learn what it's like to shudder, for you shall die." "Oh, not so fast," replied the youth. "If I am to die, I shall have a say in it." "I will soon seize you," said the fiend. "Softly, softly, do not talk so big. I am as strong as you are, and perhaps even stronger," said the boy. "We shall see," said the old man. "If you are stronger, I will let you go. Come, we will try." Then he led him by dark passages to a smith's forge, took an axe, and with one blow struck an anvil into the ground. "I can do better than that," said the youth, and went to the other anvil. The old man placed himself near and wanted to look on, and his white beard hung down. Then the youth seized the axe, split the anvil with one blow, and in it caught the old man's beard. "Now I have you," said the youth. "Now it is your turn to die." Then he seized an iron bar and beat the old man till he moaned and entreated him to stop, when he would give him great riches. The youth drew out the axe and let him go. The old man led him back into the castle and into the cellar, and showed him 3 chests full of gold. "Of these," said he, "one part is for the poor, the other for the king, and the third is yours." In the meantime it struck 12, and the spirit disappeared, so that the youth stood in darkness. "I shall still be able to find my way out," said he, and he felt about. He found the way into the room, and slept there, by his fire. The next morning the king came and said, "Now, you must have learnt what shuddering is." "No," he answered. "What can it be? My dead cousin was here, and a bearded man came and showed me a great deal of money down below, but no one told me what it was to shudder." "Then," said the king, "you have saved the castle, and shall marry my daughter." "That is all very well," said he, "but still I do not know what it is to shudder." Then the gold was brought up, and the wedding celebrated. But howsoever much the young king loved his wife, and however happy he was, he still said always, "If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder." And this at last angered her. Her waiting maid said, "I will find a cure for him. He shall soon learn what it is to shudder." She went out to the stream which flowed through the garden, and had a whole bucketful of gudgeons brought to her. At night, when the young king was sleeping, his wife was to draw the clothes off of him and empty the bucketful of cold water with the gudgeons in it all over him, so that the little fishes would sprawl about him. Then he woke up and cried, "Oh, what makes me shudder so? What makes me shudder so, dear wife? Ah, now I know what it is to shudder." The Wolf and the 7 Little Kids. There was once upon a time an old goat who had 7 little kids, and loved them with all the love of a mother for her children. One day she wanted to go into the forest and fetch some food, so she called all 7 to her and said, "Dear children, I have to go into the forest. Be on your guard against the wolf. If he comes in, he will devour you all, skin, hair, and everything. The wretch often disguises himself, but you will know him at once by his rough voice and his black feet." The kids said, "Dear mother, we will take good care of ourselves. You may go away without any anxiety." Then the old one bleated, and went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before someone knocked at the house door and called open the door. "Dear children, your mother is here, and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the little kids knew that it was the wolf by the rough voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a soft, pleasant voice, but your voice is rough. You are the wolf." Then the wolf went away to a shopkeeper and bought himself a great lump of chalk. He ate this to make his voice soft with it. Then he came back, knocked at the door of the house, and called, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here, and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the wolf had laid his black paws against the window, and the children saw them and cried, "We will not open the door. Our mother has not black feet like you. You are the wolf." Then the wolf ran to a baker and said, "I have hurt my feet. Rub some dough over them for me." And when the baker had rubbed his feet over, he ran to the miller and said, "Strew some white meal over my feet for me." The miller thought to himself, "The wolf wants to deceive someone." And the miller refused, but the wolf said, "If you will not do it, I will devour you." Then the miller was afraid, and made his paws white for him. Truly, this is the way of mankind. So now the wretch went for a 3rd time to the house door, knocked at it, and said, "Open the door for me, children. Your dear little mother has come home, and has brought every one of you something back from the forest with her." The little kids cried, "First show us your paws, that we may know if you are our dear little mother." Then he put his paws in through the window, and when the kids saw that they were white, they believed that all he said was true, and they opened the door. But who should come in but the wolf, and they were terrified and wanted to hide themselves. One sprang under the table, the second into the bed, and the third into the stove, the fourth into the kitchen, the fifth into the cupboard, the 6th under the washing bowl, and the 7th into the clock case. But the wolf found them all, and used no great ceremony. One after the other, he swallowed them down his throat. The youngest, who was in the clock case, was the only one he did not find. When the wolf had satisfied his appetite, he took himself off, laid himself down under a tree in the green meadow outside, and began to sleep. Soon afterwards, the old goat came home again from the forest. Ah, what a sight she saw there! The house door stood wide open. The table, chairs, and benches were all thrown down. The washing bowl lay broken to pieces, and the quilts and pillows were pulled off the bed. She sought her children, but they were nowhere to be found. She called them one after the other by name, but no one answered. At last, when she came to the youngest, a soft voice cried, "Dear mother, I am in the clock case." She took the kid out, and it told her that the wolf had come and eaten all of the others. Then you may imagine how she wept over her poor children. At length, in her grief, she went out, and the youngest kid ran with her. When they came to the meadow, there lay the wolf by a tree, and snored so loud that the branches shook. She looked at him on every side, and saw that something was moving and struggling in his engorged belly. "Ah, heavens," she said, "is it possible that my poor children, whom he has swallowed down for his supper, can still be alive?" Then the kid had to run home and fetch scissors, and a needle, and thread, and the goat cut open the monster's stomach, and hardly had she made one cut, than one little kid thrust its head out, and when she cut further, all 6 sprang out one after another, and were all still alive, and had suffered no injury whatever, for in his greediness the monster had swallowed them down whole. What rejoicing there was! They embraced their dear mother, and jumped like a sailor at his wedding. The mother, however, said, "Now go and look for some big stones, and we will fill the wicked beast's stomach with them, and while he's still asleep." Then the 7 kids dragged the stones thither with all speed, and put as many of them into his stomach as they could get in. And the mother sewed him up again in the greatest haste, so that he was not aware of anything, and never once stirred. When the wolf at length had had his fill of sleep, he got on his legs, and as the stones in his stomach made him very thirsty, he wanted to go to the well and drink. But when he began to walk and move about, the stones in his stomach knocked against each other and rattled. Then cried he, "What rumbles and tumbles against my poor bones? I thought 'twas 6 kids, but it feels like big stones." And when he got to the well and stooped over the water to drink, the heavy stones made him fall in, and he had to drown miserably. When the 7 kids saw that, they came running to the spot and cried aloud, "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" And they danced for joy around about the well with their mother. Faithful John. There was once upon a time an old king who was ill, and thought to himself, "I am lying on what must be my deathbed." Then the king said, "Tell Faithful John to come to me." Faithful John was his favorite servant, and was so called because he had for his whole life long been true to the king. When therefore he came beside the bed, the king said to him, "Most faithful John, I feel my end approaching, and I have no anxiety except about my son. He is still of a tender age, and cannot always know how to guide himself. If you do not promise me to teach him everything that he ought to know, and to be his foster father, I cannot close my eyes in peace." "Then," answered Faithful John, "I will not forsake him, and I will serve him with fidelity, even if it should cost me my life." At this the old king said, "Now I die in comfort and peace." Then the king added, "After my death, you shall show him the whole castle, all of the chambers, halls, and vaults, and all of the treasures which lie therein. But the last chamber in the long gallery, in which is a picture of the princess of the golden dwelling, you shall not show to him. If he sees that picture, he will fall violently in love with her, and will drop down in a swoon, and go through great danger for her sake. Therefore you must protect him from that." And when Faithful John had once more given his promise to the old king about this, the king said no more, but laid his head on his pillow and died. When the old king had been carried to his grave, Faithful John told the young king all that he had promised his father on his deathbed, and said, "This will I assuredly keep, and will be faithful to you, as I have been faithful to him, even it should cost me my life." When the morning was over, Faithful John said to him, "It is now time that you should see your inheritance. I will show you your father's palace." Then he took him about, everywhere, up and down, and let him see all the riches, and the magnificent apartments. Only there was one room which he did not open, that in which hung the dangerous picture. The picture, however, was so placed that when the door was opened, you looked straight on it, and it was so admirably painted that it seemed to breathe and live, and there was nothing more charming or beautiful in the whole world. The young king noticed, however, that Faithful John always walked past this one door, and said, "Why do you never open this one for me?" "There is something within it," he replied, "which would terrify you." But the king answered, "I've seen all the palace, and I want to know what is in this room also." And he went and tried to break open the door by force. Then Faithful John held him back and said, "I promised your father, before his death, that you should not see what is in this chamber. It might bring the greatest misfortune on you and me." "Ah, no," replied the young king. "If I do not go in, it will be my certain destruction. I should have no rest day or night until I have seen it with my own eyes. I shall not leave the place now until you have unlocked the door." Then Faithful John saw that there was no help for it now, and with a heavy heart and many sighs, sought out the key from the great bunch. When he opened the door, he went in first, and thought by standing before him he could hide the portrait so that the king should not see it in front of him. But what good was this? The king stood on tiptoe and saw it over his shoulder. And when he saw the portrait of a maiden, which was so magnificent and shone with gold and precious stones, he fell fainting to the ground. Faithful John took him up, carried him to his bed, and sorrowfully thought, "The misfortune has befallen us. Lord God, what will be the end of it?" Then he strengthened him with wine until he came to himself again. The first words the king said were, "Ah, the beautiful portrait. Whose is it?" "That is the princess of the golden dwelling," answered Faithful John. Then the king continued, "My love for her is so great that if all the leaves on all the trees were tongues, they could not declare it. I will give my life to win her. You, most faithful John, you must help me." The faithful servant considered within himself for a long time how to set about the matter, for it was difficult even to obtain the sight of the king's daughter. At length he thought of a way, and said to the king, "Everything which she has about her is gold. Tables, chairs, dishes, glasses, bowls, and household furniture. Among your treasures are 5 tons of gold. Let one of the goldsmiths of the kingdom fashion these into all manner of vessels and utensils, and all kinds of birds, wild beasts, and strange animals, such as may please her, and we will go there with them and try our luck." The king ordered all the goldsmiths to be brought to him, and they had to work night and day until at last the most splendid things were prepared. When everything was stowed on board a ship, Faithful John put on the dress of a merchant, and the king was forced to do the same in order to make himself quite unrecognizable. Then they sailed across the sea, and sailed on until they came to the town wherein dwelt the princess of the golden dwelling. Faithful John bade the king stay behind him on the ship, and wait for him. "Perhaps I shall bring the princess with me," said he. "Therefore see that everything is in order. Have the golden vessel set out, and the whole ship decorated." Then he gathered together in his apron all kinds of golden things, went on shore, and walked straight to the royal palace. When he entered the courtyard of the palace, a beautiful girl was standing there by the well with 2 golden buckets in her hand, drawing water with them. And when she was just turning around to carry away the sparkling water, she saw the stranger, and asked who he was. The stranger answered, "I am a merchant," and he opened his apron, and let her look in. Then she cried, "Oh, what beautiful things!" and put her pails down, and looked at the golden wares one after the other. Then said the girl, "The princess must see these. She has such great pleasure in golden things that she will buy all you have." She took him by the hand and led him upstairs, for she was the waiting maid. When the king's daughter saw the wares, she was quite delighted, and said, "They are so beautifully worked that I will buy all of them from you." But Faithful John said, "I am only the servant of a rich merchant. The things I have here are not to be compared with those my master has in his ship. They are the most beautiful and valuable things that have ever been made in gold." When she wanted to have everything brought up to her, he said, "There are so many of them that it would take a great many days to do that, and so many rooms would be required to exhibit them, that your house is not big enough." At that point her curiosity and longing were still more excited, until at last she said, "Conduct me to the ship. I will go there myself, and behold the treasures of your master." At this, Faithful John was quite delighted, and led her to the ship. And when the king saw her, he perceived that her beauty was even greater than the picture had represented it to be, and thought no other than that his heart would burst in twain. Then she boarded the ship, and the king led her within. Faithful John, however, remained with the helmsman, and ordered the ship to be pushed off, saying, "Set all sail till it fly like a bird in the air." Within, the king showed her all the golden vessels, every one of them, also the wild beasts and strange animals. Many hours went by while she was seeing everything, and in her delight she did not observe that the ship was sailing away. After she had looked at the last, she thanked the merchant and wanted to go home, but when she came to the side of the ship, she saw that it was on the high seas, far from land, and hurrying onwards with all sails set. "Oh," she cried in alarm, "I've been betrayed. I've been carried away and have fallen into the power of a merchant. I would rather die." The king, however, seized her hand and said, "I am not a merchant. I am a king, and of no meaner origin than you are. And if I have carried you away with subtlety, that has come to pass because of my exceedingly great love for you. The first time that I looked on your portrait, I fell fainting to the ground." When the princess of the Golden Dwelling heard this, she was comforted, and her heart was drawn to him, so that she willingly consented to be his wife. It so happened, while they were sailing onwards over the deep sea, that faithful John, who was sitting on the forepart of the vessel, making music, saw 3 ravens in the air, which came flying towards them. At this he stopped playing and listened to what they were saying to each other, for that he well understood. One cried, "Oh, there he is, carrying home the princess of the Golden Dwelling." "Yes," replied the second, "but he has not got her yet," said the third. "But he has got her. She is sitting beside him in the ship." Then the first began again and cried, "What good will that do him? When they reach land, a chestnut horse will leap forward to meet him, and the prince will want to mount it. But if he does that, it will run away with him and rise up into the air, and he will never see his maiden more." Spoke the second, "But is there no escape?" "Oh yes, if someone else mounts it swiftly, and takes out the pistol which with he will find in its holster, and shoots the horse dead, the young king is saved. But who knows that? And whoever does know it, and tells it to him, will be turned to stone from the toe to the knee." Then said the second, "I know more than that. Even if the horse be killed, the young king will still not keep his bride. When they go into the castle together, a wrought bridal garment will be lying there in a dish, and looking as if it were woven of gold and silver. It is, however, nothing but sulphur and pitch, and if he put it on, it will burn him to the very bone and marrow." Said the third, "Is there no escape at all?" "Oh yes," replied the second. "If anyone with gloves on seizes the garment and throws it into the fire and burns it, the young king will be saved. But what good will that do? Whosoever knows it and tells it to him, half his body will become stone from the knee to the heart." Then said the third, "I know still more. Even if the bridal garment be burnt, the young king will still not have his bride. After the wedding, when the dancing begins and the young queen is dancing, she will suddenly turn pale and fall down as if dead, and if someone does not lift her up and draw 3 drops of blood from her right breast and spit them out again, she will die. But if anyone who knows that were to declare it, he would become stone from the crown of his head to the sole of his foot." When the ravens had spoken of this together, they flew onwards, and faithful John had well understood everything. But from that time forth he became quiet and sad, for if he concealed what he had heard from his master, the latter would be unfortunate, and if he disclosed it to him, he himself must sacrifice his life. At length, however, he said to himself, "I will save my master, even if it brings destruction on myself." When therefore they came to shore, all happened as had been foretold by the ravens, and a magnificent chestnut horse sprang forward. "Good," said the king, "he shall carry me to my palace," and was about to mount it when faithful John got before him, jumped quickly on it, drew the pistol out of the holster, and shot the horse. Then the other attendants of the king, who were not very fond of faithful John, cried, "How shameful to kill the beautiful animal that was to have carried the king to his palace!" But the king said, "Hold your peace and leave him alone. He is my most faithful John. Who knows what good may come of this?" They went into the palace, and in the hall there stood a dish, and therein lay the bridal garment, looking no otherwise than as if it were made of gold and silver. The young king went towards it, and was about to take hold of it, but faithful John pushed him away, seized it with gloves on, carried it quickly to the fire, and burnt it. The other attendants again began to murmur, and said, Behold, now he is even burning the king's bridal garment." But the young king said, "Who knows what good he may have done? Leave him alone. He is my most faithful John." And now the wedding was solemnized. The dance began, and the bride also took part in it. Then faithful John was watchful and looked into her face, and suddenly she turned pale and fell to the ground as if she were dead. On this he ran hastily to her, lifted her up, and bore her into a chamber. Then he laid her down and knelt and sucked the 3 drops of blood from her right breast and spat them out. Immediately she breathed again and recovered herself. But the young king had seen this, and being ignorant why faithful John had done it, was angry and cried, "Throw him into the dungeon." The next morning faithful John was condemned and led to the gallows, and when he stood on high and was about to be executed, he said, "Everyone who has to die is permitted before his end to make one last speech. May I too claim the right?" "Yes," answered the king, "it shall be granted unto you." Then said faithful John, "I am unjustly condemned, and have always been true to you." And he related how he had hearkened to the conversation of the ravens when on the sea, and how he had been obliged to do all these things in order to save his master. Then cried the king, "Oh, my most faithful John! Pardon, pardon, please bring him down." But as faithful John spoke the last word, he had fallen down lifeless and become a stone. Thereupon the king and queen suffered great anguish, and the king said, "Ah, how ill I have requited great fidelity," and ordered the stone figure to be taken up and placed in his bedroom beside his bed. And as often as he looked on it and wept and said, "Ah, if I could bring you to life again, my most faithful John." Some time passed, and the queen bore twins, 2 sons who grew fast and were her delight. Once when the queen was at church, and the father was sitting with his 2 children playing beside him, he looked at the stone figure again, sighed, and full of grief he said, "Ah, if I could but bring you back to life again, my most faithful John." Then the stone began to speak and said, "You can bring me back to life again, if you will use for that purpose what is dearest to you." Then cried the king, "I will give everything I have in the world for you." The stone continued, "If you will cut off the heads of your 2 children with your own hand and sprinkle me with their blood, I shall be restored to life." The king was terrified when he heard that he himself must kill his dearest children, but he thought of faithful John's great fidelity and how he had died for him. He drew his sword, and with his own hand he cut off the children's heads. And when he had smeared the stone with their blood, life returned to it, and faithful John stood once more safe and healthy before him. He said to the king, "Your truth shall not go unrewarded," and took the heads of the children, put them on again, and rubbed the wounds with their blood, at which they became whole again immediately, and jumped about, and went on playing as if nothing had happened. Then the king was full of joy, and when he saw the queen coming, he hid faithful John and the 2 children in a great cupboard. When she entered, he said to her, "Have you been praying in the church?" "Well, yes," she answered, "but I have constantly been thinking of faithful John and what misfortune has befallen him through us." Then he said to her, "Dear wife, we can give him his life again, but it will cost us our 2 little sons, whom we must sacrifice." The queen turned pale, and her heart was full of terror, but she said, "Well, we owe that to him for his great fidelity." Then the king was rejoiced that she had thought just as he had thought, and went on and opened the cupboard, and brought forth faithful John and the 2 children. And he said, "God be praised, he is delivered, and we have our little sons again also," and told her how everything had occurred. Then they dwelt together in much happiness up until the day of their death. The Good Bargain. There was once a peasant who had driven his cow to the fair and sold her for 7 thalers. On the way home, he had to pass a pond, and already from afar he heard the frogs crying, "Quack, quack, quack, quack." "Well," he said to himself, "they are talking without rhyme or reason. It is 7 that I have received, not 8. When he got to the water, he cried to them, "You stupid animals! Don't you know better than that? It is 7 thalers and not 8. The frogs, however, stuck to their whack, 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 whack. "Come then, if you won't believe it, I can count it out to you." And he took his money out of his pocket and counted out the 7 thalers, always reckoning 4 and 20 groschen to a thaler. The frogs, however, paid no attention to his reckoning, but still cried, "Whack, whack, whack, whack." "What?" cried the peasant, quite angry. "If you know better than I, count it yourselves," and he threw all the money at them into the water. He stood still and wanted to wait until they were through and had returned to him what was his, but the frogs maintained their opinion and cried continually, "Whack, whack, whack, whack," and besides that, did not throw the money out again. He still waited a long while until evening came on and he was forced to go home. Then he abused the frogs and cried, "You water splashers, you thick heads, you goggle eyes, you have great mouths and can screech till you hurt one's ears, but you cannot count 7 thalers? Do you think I'm going to stand here till you get through?" And with that, he went away, but the frogs still cried, "Whack, whack, whack, whack." They cried after him until he went home sorely vexed. After a while, he bought another cow, which he slaughtered, and he made the calculation that if he sold the meat, well, he might gain as much as the other 2 cows were worth, and have the hide into the bargain. When therefore he got to the town with the meat, a great pack of dogs were gathered together in front of the gate, with a large greyhound at the head of them, which jumped at the meat, sniffed at it, and barked, "Row, row, row, row." As there was no stopping him, the peasant said to him, "Yes, yes, I know quite well that you are saying, 'Roof, roof, roof, roof,' because you want some of the meat, but I should be in a fine state if I were to give it to you." The dog, however, answered nothing but, "Row, row, row." "Will you promise not to devour it all then, and will you go bail for your companions?" "Row, row, row," said the dog. "Well, if you insist on it, I will leave it for you. I know you well, and know whom you serve, but this I tell you, I must have my money in 3 days, or else it will go ill with you. You can just bring it out to me." Thereupon he unloaded the meat and turned back again. The dogs fell upon it and loudly barked, "Row, row, row." The countryman, who heard them from afar, said to himself, "Hark, now they all want some, but the big one is responsible to me for it." When 3 days had passed, the countryman thought, "Tonight my money will be in my pocket," and he was quite delighted. But no one would come and pay it. "There is no trusting anyone now," he said. At last he lost patience, and went into the town to the butcher and demanded his money. The butcher thought it was a joke, but the peasant said, "Jesting apart, I will have my money." "Did not the big dog bring you the whole of the slaughtered cow 3 days ago?" Then the butcher grew angry, snatched a broomstick, and drove him out. "Wait," said the peasant, "there is still some justice in the world," and went to the royal palace and begged for an audience. He was led before the king, who sat there with his daughter, and asked him what injury he had suffered. "Alas," said he, "the frogs and the dogs have taken from me what is mine, and the butcher has paid me for it with a stick." And he related it full what had happened. Thereupon the king's daughter began to laugh heartily, and the king said to him, "I cannot give you justice in this, but you shall have my daughter to wife for it. In her whole life she has never yet laughed as she has just done at you, and I have promised her to him who could make her laugh. You may thank God for your good fortune." "Oh," answered the peasant, "I do not want her at all. I have a wife already, and she is one too many for me. When I go home, it is just as if I had my wife standing in every corner." Then the king grew angry and said, "You are a boor." "Ah, Lord King," replied the peasant, "what can you expect from an ox but beef?" "Stop," answered the king. "You shall have another reward. Be off now, but come back in 3 days, and then you shall have 500 counted out in the foal." When the peasant went out by the gate, the sentry said, "You have made the king's daughter laugh, so you will certainly receive something good." "Yes, that's what I think," answered the peasant. 500 are to be counted out to me." "Listen," said the soldier, "give me some of it. What can you do with all that money?" "As it is you," said the peasant, "you shall have 200. Present yourself in 3 days' time before the king, and let it be paid to you." A man who was standing by and had heard the conversation ran after the peasant, held him by the coat, and said, "Oh, wonder of God, what a child of fortune you are! I will change it for you. I will change it for you into small coins. What do you want with the great tailors?" "Sir," said the countryman, 300 can you still have. Give it to me in 1 coin. In 3 days from this, you will be paid for it by the king." The man was delighted with the small profit, and began the sum of bad groschen, 3 of which were worth 2 good ones. After 3 days had passed, according to the king's command, the peasant went before the king. "Pull off his coat," said the latter, "and he shall have his 500. "Ah," said the peasant, "they no longer belong to me. A man has changed for me, so by right nothing at all belongs to me." In the meantime, the soldier and the man entered and claimed what they had gained from the peasant, and they received the blows directly counted out. The soldier bore it patiently, and knew already how it tasted, but the man said sorrowfully, "Alas, alas, are these the heavy tailors?" The king could not help laughing at the peasant, and when all of his anger was spent, he said, "As you have already lost your reward before it fell to your lot, I will give you compensation. Go into my treasure chamber and get some money for yourself, as much as you will." The peasant did not need to be told twice, and stuffed into his big pockets whatsoever he could fit in. Afterwards, he went to an inn and counted out his money. The man had crept after him, and heard how he muttered to himself, "That rogue of a king has cheated me, after all. Why could he not have given me the money himself, and then I should have known what I had? How can I tell now if what I have had the luck to put into my pockets is right or not? Good heavens," said the man to himself, "that man is speaking disrespectfully of our lord the king. I will run and inform, and then I shall get a reward, and he will be punished as well." When the king heard of the peasant's words, he fell into a passion, and commanded the man to go and bring the offender to him. The man ran to the peasant. "You are to go at once to the lord king, in the very clothes you have on." "I know what's right better than that," answered the peasant. "I shall have a new coat made first." "Do you think that a man with so much money in his pocket should go there in this ragged old coat?" The man, as he saw that the peasant would not stir without another coat, and as he feared that if the king's anger cooled, he himself would lose his reward, and the peasant his punishment, said, "I will out of pure friendship lend you a coat for the short time, what people will do not for love." The peasant was contented with this, put the man's coat on, and went off with him. The king reproached the countryman because of the evil speaking of which the man had informed him. "Ah," said the peasant, "what a man says is always false. No true word ever comes out of his mouth. That rascal there is capable of maintaining that I have his coat on." "What is that?" shrieked the man. "Is the coat not mine? Have I not lent it to you out of pure friendship, in order that you might appear before the Lord King?" When the king heard that, he said, "The man has assuredly deceived one or the other of us, either myself or the peasant." And again he ordered something to be counted out to him in hard thalers. The peasant, however, went home in the good coat, with the good money in his pocket, and said to himself, "This time I have truly made it."